Hey YouTube, this is the art of prepping. Let's talk about those of us that are rigid. Now, I would admit the older you get, you typically become more rigid. Maybe this is because you just cling to certain things over others because of experiences. It could also be because of ideology. You just made up your mind one day. This is how you're going to do something or what you're going to believe. It could be that over time, maybe even from childhood, that you were told a certain thing and you believe that person, and it may or may not be true, but you want it to be true so much you still hold it in high regard. Regardless, typically the human being becomes more rigid as they get older. And this is something that you want to guard against a bit. You want to be mindful that this happens, mainly because it can be counterproductive in a lot of ways. It can be counterproductive because it limits your options. And what I mean by that is if you say to yourself, well, this is not going to be something that I'm going to think about. This is something that I won't do. This I won't even consider because so and so said it, or that's not part of my group. You may actually be hurting yourself in the long run. And this could also be true with ideologies of that group is totally wrong, even though they may have a lot of truth in what they say. Or maybe there could be preppers in particular that do a certain type of maybe a process. Let's just say, for example, of how to put a campsite together. You know, maybe you would go about it totally different. Maybe you would say, I wouldn't start with building a fire or a fire pit. You know, I would probably set up my tents first or my shelter and then build a fire. Maybe you have different ways about it. But it doesn't mean that the other person is completely wrong. I mean, there might be in some situations just logistically there seems to be, or it appears to be, certain ways are better than others. And it could be possible that certain ways just are much better than any other way that's been found out to this date. But in most situations, though, that I've seen in my life, there can be several ways to go about most things, and it still works, or it can be still fairly efficient. And so, just like I like to maybe drive a certain route to get to someone's house, I know other people that would never consider that route. They would say, no, you need to go on this street and get on this highway, and then do this and this to get there, and that's the way to go. And for me, I'd be like, man, that seems like the long way around. And they say to me, no, that's the shortcut. And I'm like, I don't think so. Why don't you look it up? And so someone's right and someone's wrong. Or it could just say, well, we both have different ways to get to the same destination. And that's what I've noticed. I've been recently around older people, and they've given me a different perspective, at least allowed me to kind of reflect a little bit. In particular, about rigidity and how sometimes we are a bit more rigid the older we get, and God bless them all. But it's amazing how people can get stuck on certain things, and they just say it's this way or no way. And you ask them why, and it's just like that's how it is. And you're like, but there's so many other ways to get to the end point. And I just bringing this up because as preppers or those that are forward thinking, prepared minded individuals, there typically is more than one way to get to the answer. And so don't limit yourself just because that's how you always did something. There may be a time that that will not be an option because of logistics or maybe because of resources, anything in particular. It just, one day you may wake up and you can't do that anymore for whatever reason. And so having the ability to think through and go, okay, there's got to be another way, or, oh yeah, here's another way. Even though I shunned that for 10 decades, maybe you're an old person, maybe even a younger person. Maybe you say for the last 10 years, I used to, prepare meals like this. And now with my new friend that came over and she showed me this, this, and this, I'm like, wow, that's much more efficient to prepare that soup, for example, or whatever. And so sometimes we limit ourselves because we only know what we know. And the more we know, the more options we really give to ourselves. So that's what happens when we become more rigid, closed-minded, is that we pretty much limit our ability to be more successful and to endure and to overcome challenges. And that defeats the whole purpose of being a prepper. So you really need an open mind. And this also is helpful for a lot of different other areas in your life, not just prepping. An open mind can really work through a lot of problems. And just because you were raised a certain way, maybe with a certain ideology, whatever that may be, it doesn't really mean that it's the only way or it is even truthful. There may be fallacies in a lot of this. And sometimes until you dig, and I mean dig deep, of really why you believe what you believe, and find out that maybe, for example, you just believe it because you were told as a child that that was a truth when it actually is totally an error. And people tell you things that they may have good intentions to help you, but maybe they were just given wrong information themselves. So the lesson of this story is simple. Be open-minded, learn from each other, learn from yourself and your past, and don't put yourself in a situation where you can't grow in the future because you just don't want to. Just because you're being stubborn, because you're older, doesn't mean that you can't develop and learn and find other ways to solve problems. But I think that the older we get, we see ourselves as a more limited individual and we start to panic. And we have certain things that we have just grown basically accustomed to. We become more comfortable doing certain things because we have a lot of past doing it. For example, having that morning cup of coffee, maybe watching that morning show that we've been watching, or that radio show we listen to every day for decades. Maybe it's something as simple as we read at a certain time, or say prayers at a certain time, or we eat at a certain time, or maybe we eat a certain type of food, on a certain day of the week. Those things, while it's not wrong and bad sometimes to have a schedule and have a rhythm to life that, especially if you enjoy that rhythm, sometimes though life is not sequential like that, and you may have to kind of break it up to overcome hardships that are come along the way. And so there's nothing wrong with being able to work through and learn new things. And while you still may want to retain some of the things that you used to do and used to think and stuff, by giving yourself these opportunities to grow and to branch out for new solutions, maybe to be, simply put, more efficient, you can be that much more able-bodied to be more prepared. And I mean, if you're into this channel, then you know that prepping is a lot more than just stuff that you can put in a room, in a box, or bury. Prepping is a mindset, a lifestyle, and we need to talk about sometimes our behaviors and thoughts. In particular, our thoughts, because they lead into our behaviors and actions. And if we don't have a handle on our thinking, our actions can be very erratic and without purpose. And this, my friends, is a tragedy.